This is just a fun, easy circular pendant that you could vary in size, scale, colour. So I wanted to show it to you because you could make it as earrings or as a key ring or put it on a chain or a cord. And it's just nice to make maybe for the summer or make for a friend's birthday or for yourself to match an outfit. So I'm going to make a purple one, and a drop bead is good for the centre, and then some seed beads. And I'm using 1.6mm aluminium wire for the frame, but you can use anything from 0.8mm or 0.9mm or 1mm, really any wire to make this frame. So I'm starting by making a circle, so I've got the circular shape started, and then the rest of it I usually do by hand. I just curl the wire around itself to create a sort of spiral, but I'm not concentrating on making it tight. So I'm going to cut it off the spool, and really the amount or the size is completely up to you. Now go to the inner wire and create a little circle. So curl that around with the tips of your round nose pliers. And if the end is a little bit sort of straight, just cut it off and go back in and get it to curl better and more sort of spiral itself around. So that's going to be where the pendant drop is going to hang. So now you've got to make sure that your stem is going to be above that pendant drop. So you might have spiraled it more than I have, but I've just found that this works for me. I just like to keep it simple. So now I'm just, opening up the gaps between where I, wrapped it around. And now I'm going to go to the above that little circle and make the stem. So that's going to be the stem wire where I'm going to suspend it from and create a suspension link. So spend a bit of time just sort of making sure the shape is as you want it. I like to push one of the inner circle to the side, so make it a little bit more asymmetric. But as I said, it's completely up to you. Next I'm using 0.4 binding wire, so any thin binding wire that you have to hand. And I'm just going to begin just by sewing those open areas together. And so just wrap it around where the stem meets the other two sort of wires, and then go in. It doesn't matter how you do this, just do it as neatly as possible, but just sort of bind them together so that they hold together and they're secured as a solid unit. So just a few little binding pieces around, and I'm not going to do the whole thing at this point because I do like to hammer the outer edge of the frame as well. So there I've just been binding it to hold those wires together. But you could start weaving at this point in and out if you've got a gap there. I'm only can start weaving now because then the gap starts opening up at this point. So I'm wrapping it around both, then bringing it through the center, and then with the tiny bit I've got left, I'll just finish it off because there's not much left there, and just make sure that I've squashed any end down. So that's just to hold it on one side at the top, and then the other bit of binding wire I will also just go around the other side of the stem to make sure that it's nice and secure and held in place. And because I've got a gap between the circles on this side, I can start weaving. So I just push the wire around one of the wires and then bring it to the other side, and then push it around to the other side and bring it around and push it, and so forth. So it's like basket weaving. Just go back and forwards with stitching. But I'm not going to go too far now with the weaving because I'm going to hammer the frame at the base, only because I want to make it nice and solid and tough. And as you know, The whammer hammer is fantastic for just flattening, work hardening, and tempering the wires. So just gently stroke hammer around, and that will fix it. I especially have to do it because it is aluminium wire, so which is softer than a silver plated copper, for instance. So I use the nylon head where I've woven because I don't want to hammer that and weaken it. So now I've got a nice solid frame, and I'm going to choose my little seed beads that will go with the center piece, but you can, do any color variation you want. And then with the end of this wire, because I've still got quite a lot, I'm going to weave around, as I said, one of the inner circle there, then bring it across, feed or thread a bead, one of my little seed beads, just make sure you can fit it in the gap. And I'm going to fill this inner sort of space within the two circles with little coloured seed beads. And that's just sort of like a colouring in. And every time I put a bead on, I then wrap once around the framework, either the top or the middle one, the outer one or the middle one. And that secures the bead where I want it. So you could just go backwards and forwards, filling in with these little beads until you've used up all your wire. So, and when you've used up all your wire, you can just cut some more wire and then start from where you finished off and just keep going. Or you could just choose to weave the whole thing with wire and have no beads in it. But it's always nice to have a splash of colour. So you can see there's the backwards and forwards weaving with the beads. So if I wanted to add more wire, I just cut another long length and I'll go in just past the last bit of weaving, leaving a tail, and that secures it and anchors it into that place. And then I continue doing a few more weaves, and then I can come back and cut off that excess projecting wire. So now as the space gets bigger, I can start threading on two or three more beads to fill that gap. So it's very, very simple. Your children, your grandchildren could do this. So it's one of those projects that's nice to make for earrings or make for a friend's birthday. And if you just, just need a bit of inspiration and you want to fill an hour, this is a sort of a fun thing to do. So I'm just continuing with this backwards and forwards, adding the beads. And then when I want to get rid of that other end, what I tend to do is push it back through the gap, because I don't want to have that wire looking like it's crossed over, and just bring it back, put it back in place and squeeze the end down, and then you won't even notice, it's invisible, you won't even notice that you've begun another length there. So I've carried on, done all the weaving up to the point where I can't actually fit any more beads. So now it's a question of just continuing with the wire and no beads. And I could cut the wire off at this stage, but I may as well, as I have enough, just go on until it meets the other bit of weaving that I did right at the beginning. So you're just doing the same thing, but just not adding beads. And I think weaving has a nice sort of decorative detail. It gives texture to the piece and just something more interesting about it to give a little sort of filigree detail. So continue until you reach the other bit of weaving, and always make sure that it looks as neat as possible because you're showing all your workings. So it is important to sort of scooch up the wires together and make them look as neat as you can. I mean, when you're first learning, it's obviously a bit harder, but with a bit of practice, you'll find that easier and easier. And then when you get it to the place you want it to be, just finish it off, and then you can cut off any excess. And always make sure that the ends are not sticking out, because they'll catch on jumpers, they'll catch on scarves, they'll catch on clothing, so, or even hair. So there you have it. The pendant is done, the outer frame is done, and then all you've got to do now is get whatever you want to suspend from the center. Just get a bit of 0.8mm wire, 20 gauge wire, depending on your bead hole. I mean, it could be, maybe it's a semi-precious stone, so you need something smaller. And I'm going to start by making a sort of little head pin. So I'm going to make a little hook or circle, rolling that around to create a little open spiral. And I'm going to hammer that spiral just to flatten it and spread it, because you'll see I'm going to actually flatten it on the bead, and if it's flat, it spreads and sits better on the side of a bead. So I'm going to thread it through the bead, leave a little gap, and then just push it over on top of the bead, and that way it's going to give another little decorative detail to the bead and act as a head pin. So now I'm just going to cut off any excess wire at the top so that I have just enough to create a round link, suspension link, which I can use to link into the pendant. So open that little link sideways and feed it in to the top link at the center of the pendant. Close it up, make sure it's completely sealed and secure, and the bead now can swing within the pendant shape. Next, I'm just going to finish off doing the top bail. And what I quite like to do, and you don't have to do this, you can just make a jump ring or a wrap loop, just hammering out the two sides of the wire to flatten it like ribbon. It works well when you're using aluminium. So you can see I've flattened it and spread just that area. And I'm just going to bring the wire forward to the front, bring it round my bail makers to create that hook at the top. And while it's in my bail makers, I'm going to bend the extension bit to a right angle near the top of the pendant, so that I can wrap it around the base of that loop, and that will be my suspension bail. So however much wire you've got, just wrap it around with tiny little movements, because you don't want to distort the top bail, and if you pull it too quickly, too fast, it can twist too much. So just tiny little movements, and squeeze the ends so that they're completely, they're not sticking out and they're neat enough. So there's the top bail of the pendant. And then all you need is a ribbon, a chain, anything to suspend it from. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this one. And here's another variation where you can wire in little wire spirals or bits of filigree wire, and you just bind them in just as you would with beads. So create your own versions and just have fun with this technique.